Hopefully everybody.
Wait,
Okay, good morning, everybody, and welcome to a presentation on Alex Katz. This is part of a series that we've been doing on Jewish artists that had a substantial contribution to American modernism. It's hosted by Kehilat Hanahar, the little shul by the river, which I'm really happy about. A very inclusive community that happens to include a lot of artists. So it's a wonderful community. And I'm excited to present this lecture. Previously, we have looked at Ben Shahn, Louise Nevelson, Helen Frankenthaler, Mark Rothko, Miriam Shapiro. Alex Katz certainly belongs in this pantheon of great artists, and amazingly is having more impact and influence now at age 96 than he's probably had the length of his career. He's in his 8th decade of painting, which by itself is mind-blowing because he paints large paintings that are 12 feet, 20 feet. He's on a scaffold still and believes that he's still growing, as you'll see and hear in this presentation. It'll take about an hour and 15 minutes. There are 2 videos that are brief. One, sort of in the middle, talks about the way he painted a certain painting that I love, and it really sort of identifies and analyzes his virtuosity, which is belied sometimes just by the simplicity of the forms. And then one at the end where I thought for 3 or 4 minutes, it would be nice to hear his voice and his reflection on his career. But let's get started. He really came of age as a painter in the 50s, the early 50s, when New York City was a hotbed of art and modernism. Jackson Pollock and Franz Kline and Mark Rothko turned the world upside down. And he was then just coming out of art school, was very affected by it, very influenced by it, by its openness, by its energy, but he didn't want to paint that way. He wanted to paint figuratively, and he wanted to find a place in the middle of it, not pop, not realism, not abstract expressionism, something that was his own, but that would enable him to feel and be as fully modern as anyone else. And it's really interesting. He read a lot of poetry, and that's by virtue of his mother's urging or requiring, which we'll get to in a second. But Charles Baudelaire was a favorite of his, and in particular, Baudelaire asked the question, which he thought about his whole life, is still thinking about it. What does it mean to be of one's time? And what Baudelaire said is an unwavering commitment to modernity. So let's take a look at this amazing character, Alex Katz. Next. So here's a picture of his parents and Alex in the middle. His mother, her name was Seema. Her stage name was Ella Marion. And this is a picture of her in 1918, where she was a star of Yiddish theater in Riga, in Russia, and then coming to New York on 2nd Avenue Yiddish theater. And very theatrical, very stylish, very, very opinionated and funny. He tells the story when he had a horrible review at one of his first big shows by Hilton Kramer, who was one of the real authorities. He called his mother to tell her, and she said, "Fine, good, somebody's noticed you." So it was, I guess, made him feel a little better. But she was remarkable. So that's Seema, and she was from Bialystok, which is where my forebears were all from. And she got away as soon as she could. She spoke 5 languages, went on her own to Palestine when she was 14, came back to study in St. Petersburg, made her way to America, stopping in Riga, where she met Yitzhak, Isaac, Isaac, his father, was very sturdy, very, very disciplined, drummed into him that technique was everything, that he had to be focused and he had to develop his technique for whatever it was he was doing. They were both very art conscious. His mother had opinions about paintings. They had paintings in their house. He was born in Sheepshead Bay. They moved to St. Albans, Queens. Every room in the house was painted different colors by his father. And on the outside, the house was painted yellow, the inside pale violet. Alex remembers it as looking great, like it was something out of Paris. And they had paintings on the wall, which nobody had. And bear in mind, they're first generation immigrants, only speaking Yiddish and Russian when they arrived, other than her multiple languages. And yet they created this house where style was important. They were both very stylish. He was very natty, and where art was really at the center. So when Alex said, got interested in art, it was encouraged. His father encouraged him. His father, who was sort of an amateur artist, taught him to draw, and wished perhaps he should be an architect because that combined art and something productive. He didn't consider fine arts productive, but he encouraged it. And the same with his mother. If he had to do art, she said, do commercial art. You may make a few pennies, but it was a house that was full of it. And he was encouraged to draw. And in fact, what he says in his autobiography, which is fascinating, by the way, called Invented Symbols, he drew all over the house, all over the walls, all over the stairwell. And basically, he was just told, don't do it again. So this is the home that he lived in. And he talks about when he was very young, what he remembers is doing crayon sketches. At 7 years old, he won the Wanamaker City Prize for drawing. Of course, it was extremely childish, and he figured maybe he was the only entry. But he can't make sense of what he drew, but it was imaginative. It wasn't conventional, and I guess that was the point. And that really defined the career he's about to have. Next. There we are. So this is, I got to erase something in the middle of my, there we go. So this is the house in St. Albans, and his drawing of it when he was at Skowhegan, which was in Maine, an art school that he went to after Cooper Union. Pretty primitive, but this is recording his childhood, and he had tons of drawings that were basic. Next. So he went to high school at Woodrow Wilson. It was a trade school. His parents wanted him to go to something more academic, but he was told by a friend that at Woodrow Wilson, you did art half the day, and the rest of the time you could dance and play and have a great time. And that was good for him, and he overrode the objections of his parents, and off he went. At Woodrow Wilson, he did spend half the day drawing. He had a very good number of teachers. One of the things they did throughout high school was what he called cast drawings, where they would do drawings of classic statuary and sculptures. And they would draw and they would draw and they would draw because they were learning, he was learning to draw systematically and to emphasize sort of the light and dark harmonies in the work. And he became a superb draftsperson and was drawing all the time. This is him, one of his drawings of a man playing the piano. He loved to dance. He loved jazz. He was totally into bebop, wearing zoot suits and dancing. And it's amazing in his autobiography how much he talks about dancing. And it is not a surprise that he becomes the major costume and set designer for the Paul Taylor Dance Theater for over 20 years. Next. So he graduates school, and in 1944, he joins the Navy before he gets drafted. He's in the Navy for about a year. He comes out, he gets muster out $300, and he's on the 5220 plan, which is $20 a month for 52 weeks. He gets home before his mother gets home. She was somewhere for a week, and paints the whole house aquamarine, much to her shock when she gets home. But again, they were pretty laid back. He didn't get in too much trouble. So he's, and actually, right before he leaves Cooper Union, in his last year, a teacher that he had told him to go see the Matisse exhibit, which was at the Pierre Matisse Gallery. And the teacher said to him, "The man's 80 years old, but he's very good." And so Alex says, and I quote, "I did, and I nearly fainted. I never believed anybody could paint that well. It took me about 3 years to fully appreciate those Matisses. They were so beautifully composed and did things spatially all at once, and yet it all looked so effortless. That was a big deal for me. It changed my life." So he gets out of the Navy, and a friend of his said that he should apply to Cooper Union, which was one of the main art schools. They were really a Bauhaus school. That was their orientation, very modern. And well, you didn't have a lot of training in fine arts like many of the other applicants. And there were 1,800 that applied for 90 spots in the school. But to his surprise, he got in. And this is a guy, by the way, that's incredibly competitive. He wants to prove himself. And I believe, like a lot of the immigrant stories we've seen, his was really an outsider type story. He still didn't speak a perfect English. He still felt like he didn't fit in. And in fact, he didn't. He didn't fit in as a general matter. He didn't fit in the kind of art that they were encouraging. But he listened, he worked hard. And one other thing about him that I saw throughout his life until now, he was interested in anybody that was painting, that was sculpting, that had an idea about art. He wanted to know. He had this incredible thirst. And even now, he has a foundation. He donates millions of dollars to new artists, buys their work, and enables them to be shown in local museums. It really encourages and is fully into the life of art. In any event, Morris Cantor, who is a well-known artist, was his teacher and recommends him for a scholarship to Skowhegan in Maine. And there he has there he has a painting teacher named Henry Varnum Poor, who introduces him to painting, and a painting of a style that he didn't do. First of all, he's painting en plein air. He's painting directly with nature. And it's incredibly exciting to him. And he's painting fast. Poor has his students finishing their painted sketches in 20 minutes. And he does this for 2 years. He's there for 2 summers, and he comes back and he really sees for himself a life in art. This is a painting that he did of his mother. It's one of the first paintings that I saw. And at the Guggenheim, this is what they led off with. The Guggenheim was a marvelous show. For those that didn't make it, it's too bad, because they had, each level was another decade of his career. And next to this is a painting by Arshil Gorky, who was somebody that he really admired and took a lot from in his figurative painting. Next. So here he is at Skowhegan. He is sort of off center left with a white t-shirt on, listening to an art lecture. But here's where he was learning to become a painter. He was learning to paint fast. He was learning to paint directly. It was a real turn on. He said it was like feeling lust for the first time. But how was he going to establish his own identity? How was he going to bring it into his modern art? Next. So well, this is a little out of order, but this is back in high school. But this is him on the top, on the right. He's on the track team. And then below that, he is in a photo booth with his buddies, both of whom, by the way, were aspiring artists. So we'll relate back to that in a little while, most notably painting a self-portrait of him in the tracksuit that he wore. But let's move on. Next. So 1950s, I'm seeing my own words at the bottom of my computer. I must be on some type of Siri. Can't stand that Siri. All right, well, I'm going to ignore it unless somebody can help me. Okay, so he's in New York City, and while he's getting started in the city, he's working. He can't afford not to. He works for 10 years for framers, carving frames, 10 years. And in between that, he works for muralists, 3 muralists doing murals in the city, where he learns a lot. He learns about scale. He learns about perspective. He learns about, creating large imagery, which he's going to come back to. He found it all very exciting and really had a taste for mural painting, which he later on gets a chance to do. In New York, he's obviously very influenced by Pollock, who's exploded. He loves the freedom. He loves the energy, but he doesn't like the style, the work. He wants to be a figurative painter. And it's so out of fashion there that in the early years where he's showing his work, he literally is booed out of certain galleries because he is so counter to the current fashion. He also loves jazz, and he loves Stan Getz and his coolness and his technical virtuosity. That's what he wants for himself. He says the most exciting moment when he's asked, and he's asked by Richard Prince in an interview, what was the most exciting thing that ever happened to you? He says, when Lionel Hampton walked into the frame shop. So beginning in the 1950s and for the rest of his life, and still, he wanted to reinvent figuration, opting for the figure not as an interiorized subject, not subjective, but a signpost for the here and now, the immediate presence, he called it. And his whole life, he then was focused on the immediate present, quick light passing is what he called it. He also was very influenced and became a real part of the downtown scene. So not only Pollock and Klein and Rothko and de Kooning and the others, but also the poets. New York was an amazing time then. So you had these first and second generation painters, and you had the poets, Ashbery and Frank O'Hara, and a number of them, Berrigan. And he loved poetry because his mother made him read poetry, and since he was 4 years old, but he never lost his taste for it. And he really saw the very close connection of the work of these poets and the art that was happening. And they all did. They all saw this real harmony of these arts. And that was something he was always interested in. And they became a part of the family of subjects that he painted, as you'll see, for his whole career. He loved painting dancers, poets, film producers, photographers. This was really part of his milieu. This is a scene, it's sort of a early group portrait. He did any number of them. This is a little bit, it has more of a busy background than will be the case. His backgrounds become flatter and blanker as time goes on. But the figures are starting to be developed, and he's thinking about how he positions them in terms of positionally and with the light and with perspective. Next. Well, I think I either missed, but that's okay. There was a winter scene in there that was pretty interesting, but we're by it. So these are collages that he did and has done from time to time his whole career, but he did these in a very intense period for a period of 6 years, from 54 to 60. He was doing them in Maine. They were these collages of these still lives, landscapes, small figures. None of them were more than 12 inches high, but he loved doing these. And he also knew that once he could figure out how to make these small things big, which is what scale is about, he would be able to do the same with his larger paintings, which is what he did. So these collages seen up close, which was really a privilege, they're delightful. And knowing that they're just cutouts of colored paper, some of which he painted himself, and some of which he acquired using a single-edged razor glued on with a dab of Elmer's, and they're still beautiful after 50 years is incredible. And it also offers, at least to me, in addition to their charm, is a demonstration of what it means to work. That this artist composing these small scenes by himself, dozens of them over the 5 years or so that he was composing them in unoccupied hours. He's recalibrating, he's adjusting, he's attentive to all the things that would characterize his work in later years, which was light, surface, and scale. And one more really important thing, ambition to perfect his technique, ambition to be the best artist. And he knew, and his father drummed it into him. And unfortunately, his father died when he was 16, but technique work, that was the key to having a systematic approach to his art. Even if the art continued to change, his approach to it wouldn't. Next. So here is at Ada, who he met at the end of 1957 and married in 1958. There's a picture of them in their loft, and one of the first of literally hundreds of portraits that he has done of Ada. You talk to people, some say he's done 200, another guy says 500. At the Guggenheim, they said 1,000, which is hard to believe, but she is not only his favorite model, but a key component for the style that he was to create. When he met her, she's a biology student. He says she's socially graceful, adept, beautiful. She's a great dancer. And she saw the promise in his work, which not everybody did by any means then. And the story he tells in his autobiography, he says there were two friends of mine that were both great ladies' men, Bob Maxwell, who was like a movie star, and Blackie Langley. They all loved women from age 16 to 60, whatever they looked like. And he said, women loved them. And then they said, we met an interesting girl, which meant that neither of them were able to get her attention. And they meant Ada. She got invited to a 2-man exhibit that he was doing at the Tanager Gallery, or Tanager, I'm not sure. And he sees her and he's introduced to her because they had told her about her. And he said, well, if they couldn't connect with her, then I probably can. And that was partly because he couldn't connect with any of the women that they liked. Anyway, that's how he met her. He was smitten, so was she, and they got married in 1958. She was not only his model, but she was his muse. She was a key. She was really had agency in his work and was a key to his developing style. She had, and as he painted her, was two key elements, figure and ground, that really defined his pared down approach to his work. It's been pointed out, I read it several times, that Manet, who he loved and who was hugely influential, as we'll see in a moment, also had a favorite model, probably his muse, named Victorine Meurent. And you see her in all of her, so many of his paintings. The two of them seem to be like these aesthetic agents to their artist's work. So let's take a look at Ada next. These are obviously early, and he's not trying to be precise, obviously. He's flattened the image. The backgrounds are blank, pure color. The figures are on the surface, and he's painting dozens of these in the 50s and late 50s. The first of, as some say, 1,000 images. Next. Here, and this is actually a little earlier, and you can see, his drawing skill, but this is on the left, a self-portrait of him in his track jacket. Here he is, he's 29 years old in something he wore when he was 16 with a scarf. So he's very stylish. Style is a big deal for him. And fashion is always a big deal. He says fashion always changes, but he loves that about it. But he wants to get at, what is really sort of intrinsic. His titles, and this is Ada in a black sweater, also very stylish. And many of his paintings at this time are black hat, black suit, track suit. So style, fashion is a big deal. When I look at this portrait of Ada, it really makes me think of Manet, who's my favorite artist as well among the Europeans. And in terms of how she is sitting on the surface, she is right up front. The background with this negative space really thrusts her into the foreground, which is what I think Manet did so beautifully. And we're going to see other influences of Manet on him as we go. Next. Well, there's the track team again, and the boys in the photo booth, all of 16 years old. So I think you can go, Jerry. Next. Okay, so this is also in 1959, Ada twice. Why is that? Well, he does repetition over the course of his career. It's almost like depersonalizing it, but they're not exact duplicates. I think he's, I don't know, doubling down somehow on the premise of his portraits that also sort of undermines them a little bit, the uniqueness of a single portrait. But he's experimenting with, and I think it's also his own view of how he is looking at the subject. Again, he is focused on immediate, present, immediate perception. This idea of optics and light and space is something that he develops over the course of his career. Next to it is Frank O'Hara. This is a wood cutout, oil on wood, standing on a little plinth, and he paints the back and the front. How does this come about? Because he does a painting of his favorite poet, Frank O'Hara, and he doesn't like anything but the figure. So he cuts everything out and puts it on a board and stands it up. And then he paints the back. This is probably the first or nearly the first of cutouts, which is another preoccupation of his over the course of his career. And when you see them, we had them all over the Guggenheim, and I've looked at many galleries where he does these cutouts, and they're really, they are deceptive. They, they're flat, they're two-dimensional, but somehow when you look at them, he's been able to capture it in a way that you see 3 dimensions, or you have an impression that is really present about the figure. So he's somehow converting 3-dimensional figures into flat 2 dimensions, literally flat, standing up on plinths. Next. Here again, we're still in the 50s, and he's still drawing and painting figures and just figuring it out. This is Paul Taylor, who he meets just about this time, and as I said, goes on to be his set designer and costume designer for over 20 years. And there is Ada in the classic black suit. Bolder than before, perhaps. Again, flat, plain background. Next. So we're now entering the 60s, and there is Alex, his little James Dean-like look. And again, as I said, he always was tough. The abstract expressionists, when they were painting large, when he went large, and he really went large, he went larger than any of them. He wanted to knock them off the wall. That's what he said. So he moves to a larger space in 1963 on Fifth Avenue, and he's doing larger and larger pieces, and he needs to develop techniques that enable him to manage that large work, and a technique that he perfects, over the rest of his career. So next. Here he is in their loft on 28th Street. There he is with Ada and their son Vincent. Of course, in the background is that painting again, Ada. And next. And he's living and working in this relatively small space. There he is painting a rather large piece. Ada's to the right, Ada and Vincent, and here in the back, and there's Vincent Katz painting or drawing at the base with the television on. So this is the way they lived. And in fact, he treasured his studio space for the rest of his life in Lincolnville, on Fifth Avenue, and it was also where they lived, but their own domicile accommodations were dwarfed by the space that he gave to the art. And there they are in Lincolnville. He bought this house in 1954. He bought it with Lois Dodd and Alice and Rachel Cohn, I think. He married Rachel Cohn in 1951. They were married for 6 years. They were really roommates. It was sort of an accommodation. She had an apartment that she was paying $25 a month for, and he moved in. And they had an amicable divorce in 1956, I believe. Next. So here is one of his iconic pieces, also very early, 1960. That is James Schuyler in the background, one of his great poet friends, a really important poet in the New York School in the 50s, and somebody who wrote the poetry that is on the catalog from the Guggenheim. But this is the black dress. It sort of ups the ante that we saw with Ada. That was just Ada. This is 6 times Ada. And it seems like a modeling session. It underscores the black dress itself, the subject of fashion as a subject of his painting. And we know it's always close to his heart. It was important from the very growing up in his childhood. Fashion and style were critically important. Again, to me, it's interesting that it is this repetition, which we will see over and over, looks to me like he's trying to get different angles on the same subject, almost like in the old times when, and he gets into this with fragmentation later on, where a sculptor may not have the original sitter, but gets several portraits that show different vantage points so that he can create the completed image. Maybe this is something like that, but repetition becomes a real theme. And we'll see later on in several paintings that this is repeated, but refined in a way that he fragments the image. Next. Okay, 1963, he's moved into his large space on Fifth Avenue. And what happens? His paintings get large. And this is a spectacular one. This is, 10 feet, 10 feet wide and 8 feet high. And it's the emergence for him of faces. He has made this leap from what were sort of primitive looking figures as he was working out his craft. And now he has jumped to this amazing piece where it's almost like a design piece, like advertising copy, like a billboard, which he loved. And he said, I love the scale of billboard. I love the romance of billboards. I love the bluntness of them. And this is Ada, right on the surface, pure red background. He's dramatically scaled up his depiction of her face, shortened her head against this field of red. And as the title says, works, it's not really an expression of a person, it's a phenomenon of the smile. It's on the surface. There's really no narrative connected to this. It's surface. You could say it's superficial. There's not a story underneath, but this is where Alex Katz is. He loves the surface. He is present, immediate. His light is present, and the images he captures are. And we're going to see this over and over. The Red Smile, one of his most famous pieces. Next. So staying with faces, he then does something very interesting yet again. He starts cropping, like ad copy, the images. This on the left is a portrait of Elaine de Kooning. She is one of the queens of New York City art, the wife of William de Kooning and a great artist on her own. And here he's, cut her face off at the lower lip. She happened to love this painting. And it was, again, saying something. He loved movies, and he loved the way wide angle screening was done. And he adapted it in trying out different ways for a similar effect in his own portraiture. Kind of radical, but he's pushing against the boundaries of likeness. And again, it's all in these optics of perception, of seeing directly, seeing immediately. He calls it quick passing light. And this is Ada in a bathing cap, just a beautiful image, again, cropped at the top, which you wouldn't normally do, and a pretty large image that's 6 feet, almost 6 by 6. Next. Now, still in the mid-60s, he's doing compositions, his new challenge. He's trying to figure out how to manage space and color and light. He's still very committed to fast light, to surface, to the immediate present. These are the things that he first learned at Skowhegan. Immediacy also means speed. And He was a fast painter. He always finished in a day, but it was the result of meticulous preparation. And when his paintings got bigger, he couldn't paint directly anymore. He had to figure out how to do it. And he had a scheme that he continued to perfect, where he had a pre-planned process that enabled him to paint in one continuous session. So first he painted small sketches, in this case, of all the different figures, preparatory drawing of the composition that needed to be enlarged. And as they got really big, he enlarged it by a Renaissance method that he learned from the muralists that he was working for in the 50s, where he'd make a full-scale cartoon or drawing that on which he would transfer his final design by pouncing. It was called going over the contours of the cartoon, pricking holes and dusting with a pigment so that the outline of his painting emerged. And he would have already selected and prepared all of his paints. So once he was ready, then he would paint directly until it was done. So and he would be painting on a wet-on-wet basis, which he became extremely skilled at doing, and he loved doing it. He loved it, as we'll see in the painting that I selected for a video. He loved that paint. He was also a superb at drawing line, but he loved how when you painted wet on wet, at the borders of that line, there were different nuances or shadings that he loved incorporating into the work. So this was Lawn Party. He studied, as I said, lots of other artists. One of his favorites, again, was Edouard Manet. And this is Music in the Tuileries Garden. And he looked at this and he studied this of the way he treated space and perspective and figure. Next. Here's another iconic painting of his, The Cocktail Party. This is reproduced over and over again. Well, obviously it's dated because they're all drinking cocktails and smoking cigarettes. But for Alex, it's not dated because his technique is to capture the direct image, the immediate sense of that, and he believes that it remains, it sustains, it's eternal. It's like capturing eternity in the moment. And in fact, it's an image that has been popular for over 50 years, The Cocktail Party. Next. So dance was really important to him. He loved dancing. He and Ada loved dancing. He danced his way, as he said, through high school. Here he is, and this is Private Domain. It was a famous work of the Paul Taylor Group. As I said, his parents were active in theater. They set up their own amateur theater, and they conveyed to him, because they manifested this sense that life was a dance, really, in their case, to be enjoyed, but it was all performance. And he early on studied the dance and the way image and gesture and surface interacted. In this piece, which he designed the costumes for and the set, he cut out with scissors and pasted together like one giant collage, these figures that were intersecting in all different ways that made individual bodies and fragments and collections and torsos. It made for a fascinating piece, and it was part of the dance piece, and he made it part of the portrait. Next. Okay, now he's still in late 60s. He's also doing landscapes. He's doing flowers. He loves flowers, and he loves the brilliant color. He loves the light and dark, the hard and soft spaces, and he likes his flowers big. And you're going to see how big he gets. And when you see these in person, it's kind of mind-blowing. He's been painting flowers for over 80 years, the whole length of his career. And all of the features of his signature art, concentration on surface, the quick, specific light in the space, the scale, it's all present. This Blue Flags features iris blossoms working against, this background. I don't know, I have a different color background in my notes, but again, massive in scale, 80 inches by 67. They appear almost like they are collaged. They appear to be almost cutouts themselves. The background is ambiguous and the light is collected as one focuses on the attention on the surfaces, sees different parts of the flower that you might miss when you're just taking it in as a whole. And this is the beauty of his capture. Next. Here's more of the same. The superb lilies on the bottom, that is 144 inches. That's 12 feet by 6 feet. Sweet peas, again, oil on linen is 96 by 52. These are gorgeous when you see them all painted again in one pass, which, his virtuosity, it looks so simple, but, it's extraordinary. And it's so immersive when you're standing in front of it. It's like you're being swallowed by these extraordinary blooms. Next. Still in 67, he's still doing faces. Here he's doing Ada and Vincent. And next to it is Ted Berrigan, one of his artist friends. Again, the faces, the use of light and line, the heightened sense of presence. It seems immediate, not urgent, but immediate. Next. So now we're going to look at his cutouts. And, I think you can see, as this is 68, he is so prolific and he's doing different kinds of work, but he's all applying his same theory in all of them. He's just extending the scope of what he's doing, but it's still focused on light, on surface, on immediacy. Here is his very dear friends, Rudy Burkhart and Edward Denby. Edward was a dance critic and was to be his dance muse for his whole career and dear friend. And Rudy Burkhart, and they lived together. Burkhart was a producer and film producer and photographer. And here they are sitting together. When you look at this from both sides, it really does look three-dimensional, but it's just aluminum with the features painted on it, with the edges are amazing on it. And here is yours truly trying to get a word in, but they're not listening to me, so I stopped. Next. Here are more of these cutouts. These are all on their aluminum stands. It's a whole room full of people called One Flight Up. And they're all in different positions, looking at each other in different ways, looking at themselves in a mirror, giving you the sense of a room that is full of people. It's all two-dimensional representations of multi-dimensional images and what your eye sees. And this is what he's getting at. And he is to do these cutouts. He's still doing them today. He will do them for the rest of his career, starting here in the late 60s. Next. So now he is getting interested, much like he was doing repetition before and doing full figured cutouts. He's now doing cutouts, but they're fragments. So he's into now fragmentation, fragmenting body parts. This is John's loft, where the people are partial, whole, heads, eyes, standing. Again, giving you a group portrait with all these disparate figures and a different way of looking at this group. And he's always interested in groups. And next to it is Ada, Ada with nose. So here's Ada, nose, and there's Ada without a nose. And theoretically, I think he thinks it may be offering a more complete or enumerated view of the person or the group than a traditional portrait might. Next. So here's Mr. Cool, self-portrait, and he loves cool. Going back to Stan Kenton and all of his jazz friends, I think he sees himself as cool in a way. He loves it. It's classic Katz in the way that it exhibits this painted flatness that interestingly lends itself perfectly to print. So this is a print next to it. Now, I selected one that wasn't of the same coloration. There are dozens, if not hundreds, of this image in print, and he loved lithography. It was another thing that he spent a lot of time on. And here at the bottom right is him working at the Morlot Graphics on a piece that he did, which was homage to Frank O'Hara, who died. Unfortunately, somebody ran him over in it with a dune buggy. It was a great tragedy for the entire New York-based artist community. But here he is. He loves commercial art. He loves, as I said, advertising, design, billboard, movies. And here he is right at the surface of the painting, self-portrait with glasses. And he also is interested in the analysis of this, especially when you see it up close, and it's huge, is the play of light in all the surfaces on his face. Next. Here he is at Kent State in the 70s. Kent State, as we all might remember, was traumatized in the early 70s with the shootings. He was teaching art there. Next. And obviously painting. And here are two paintings he does in 72, also huge, especially Blue Umbrella, which is one of mine and millions of people's favorite image. So stylized, so fashionable. Here is Ada with a blue umbrella that's 12 feet by 10 feet, just beautiful. And the other picture is of somebody named Stanley, who was a fashion model, and the little glints and touches of glare sort of bring his whole face more present and with more energy. But both of these are examples of this crossover always with him with fashion, style, and portraiture. But again, it's the surface is so important to him and the immediacy of the surface. And he knew that he could increase, by increasing the size of the color surface, as well as cropping and other techniques, he could intensify the experience. Next. Here is another piece that is spectacular when you're looking at it, 12 feet long, highly stylized, so impressive, where Katz did so many images of water as a vehicle for the reflected image. But this is one of the very few that's without a figure, this empty canoe that is doubled within this placid, almost unearthly lake mirrored into a double. And it is unearthly. There's really no, it's sort of floating. The canoe and the image is floating in space, even though you know it's a lake. Next. here is Katz. He's given a chance, and we know how he loves billboards and murals. He's given a chance to decorate Times Square on 42nd and 7th Avenue, right by where my office was, a horizontal panel that's 250 feet long of 9 women. And that's a study of 5 women that were part of the 9 that are going up there with a tower that's 60 feet. And here they are painting, by his description and design, the images. And there, yeah, okay. I saw something else. I think I'm looking at Miriam. Hi, Miriam. Okay, next. This is now in late 70s. He is on the beach. It's Round Hill. And this is one of his favorite settings. He did many of these beach groupings. Typically, everybody is sort of alone together. Nobody's touching, nobody's really relating to each other. It sort of underscores his deep engagement with modern painting, because you can see, and he refers somewhere of this aspects of Manet and Le Déjeuner sur l'herbe, which is there in the bottom corner. And his influence is manifested in many ways, not just the backgrounds of the portraits. But in this case, the portrait itself that Katz does is, again, it's all surface and light and space among and between the figures, but nobody's really relating. Next. Nobody's relating because it's not about a narrative. There's nothing about his work that's about a narrative until towards the end, we'll see, as he continues to do portraits of Ada, that I think the subjective creeps in. This is a little bit of methodology. You can see him painting friends, Rudy and Yvonne, and he's standing on the stool, filling in, painting directly that which he has outlined in the cartoon. Next. In the 80s. And you'll see he keeps repeating subjects, whether it's cutouts, whether it's flowers, whether it's landscapes, whether it's cutouts, whether it's murals, all just as the decades roll. And the only thing that changes, I think, is his self-knowledge, but also his virtuosity just gets deeper and gets more and more extraordinary. So next. Here he is installing a mural for the Silvia Molo Federal Building at Foley Square. That is him on the scaffold, painting it, installing it. He painted this himself. And there are the figures painted. Unfortunately, they're watermarks, so they look a little weird. But, you know, this was, oh, so exciting to him. Go big. Loved it. Next. Two of my favorite pieces. Again, in person, they're spectacular. They both show the exquisite use of light, which he says lives on the surface as a matter of process and style. From the process point of view, the surface of the painting is covered, in this case, in Tracy on the Raft, 5 layers of ground before he puts a brush on it. Smooth and dense, but porous, he says. The light goes into it and the light comes back out. He says it took him 10 years to arrive at this intended effect. And then to the surface, he applies his paint, which he says lives on the surface. The initial shine disappears and the color opens up and one can see into it. Okay, this is a little bit beyond me. My painter and my painter friend, our painter extraordinaire, Bob Beck, probably could tell me what that actually means, but the result is astounding and to see the light on the traced on the edges of her legs and knees and her hair and the inside of her arm and the part of her suit, and to see the light coming through the wing of the seagull, which is so magnificent, again, up close, then I believe it. I just don't know how he does it. And he says it's taken him 10 years to figure it out. Next. Here is a painting he did called Pas de Deux, 1983. And now, interesting, he has painted a group scene where, as opposed to before when nobody was touching, here everybody's touching. Everybody's touching, but they're not really relating to each other. It's kind of weird. They're still alone together, although contact is being made. Next. And similarly, really a year later, he's doing a scene with all these young women in their bathing suits together, done on 4 panels, and they're all touching, but they're not relating to each other at all. They're all staring to the side or straight ahead, but nobody is looking at each other at all. So interesting. Next. So this is one of the more famous pieces that Paul Taylor's group did. For a while, Rauschenberg was doing sets and costumes, and it was in this dance that, because Katz had stopped, and then he replaced Rauschenberg. And here it's a performance called Last Look, and there it is below in action, and there is the panels that Katz painted. And it's a collection, it's a haunting dance. It's a collection of brutal gestures and fleeting, warped images that begin right when the curtain raises, in which all these individual bodies emerge from what a critic calls a human junk pile. And these are all in front of these 8 to 10 foot tall reflective columns that Katz calls prisms, that he wraps in taut sheets of mylar. They were, he says, more funhouse than mirror. Next. His subject here, Lisa, as the individual cropped, partly cropped to the right, and in her version, his version, 30 years later, of the famous black dress. This is very stylized, and he has chosen for his subject, his model, somebody that is as familiar with making images as she is for being made into an image. She is Lisa Cooper. She's a muse not only for Katz, but for Keith Haring, Francisco Clemente, Robert Mapplethorpe, a former fixture in the New York City club scene, and currently a celebrity stylist. But again, perfect for Katz. This is style, this is fashion, and this is this immediate present image. Okay, next, going into the 90s. And there is Alex and Ada. So leading off with another double portrait. This is a double portrait, Ada, Ada. Like Ada, Ada of 1958. This is Ada, Ada of 91. Again, it's not about narrative. There is some reason that he is interested in these double images, and these are cropped, again, in keeping with this interest he has in changing figuration. There's no narrative content, he would say, although by her face and the way he captures it, one wonders if anything has changed. She's certainly getting older, but here is Ada, Ada, 30 years later. Next. This is another group composition, now 18 years after the one we saw before. at Round Hill. This is Lincolnville Labor Day, 1992. And once again, we have a group portrait, and they again are highly stylized. Everything is on the surface and nobody is really engaged with one another. And it again harks back to some of the compositions he studied by Manet and Renoir and others. Next. Okay, now we're back to nature. These are two images of Black Brook. Black Brook was an ordinary stream that he spent 2 decades painting, and looked at many of them. They are increasingly abstracted, where he's capturing this light and these fugitive forms. This runs across the road and is overhung with trees and foliage. And over the decades he's painting this, the paintings have changed in scale and in flow and in light. The most recent, which I couldn't find online to include here, called Black Brook 16, is 8 feet by 30 feet, almost life scale of the stream itself. Again, with amorphous shapes and bright glints emerging from the depths. He says, and this becomes a theme which is continuing, he wanted to make an environmental landscape that you are in it. And when you see it and you're in front of it, you can well imagine that you are in it. Next. It's a gorgeous painting, startling when you're in front of it. It's called Lake Light. And the glare of this reflected light is represented as sort of a distinct white mass rather than a diffused atmosphere. And in a startling way, when you look at it, you realize that the dock at the base is so disproportionately tiny. It's just totally out of scale with this body of light, which I think just extraordinarily emphasizes the force of this light that is rushing to the surface. And Katz says about this piece, he said, when you see something, it's like a blast. You want that blast. It's the blast of the lake light. Okay, next. These are apple blossoms. This is a very large piece again, that you can also get lost in it when you get up close. Paradoxically, when you get up close, it's so stylized and different than when, because it conveys a very naturalistic sense of the way we perceive it when you step back from it. His friend Edwin Denby talked about this piece and he coined it. He said, it's extremely real and it's not real at all. Next. Continuing, this is a gigantic piece, 10 feet by 20, called Forsythia. It's an outsized scaled Forsythia, and the brush strokes in it, again, to see this up close is quite something. It sort of brushes you into this cluster of bushes in the early spring. You get immersed so close that the branches sort of become a blur, and that's the way he is seeing it, and that's the feeling that you get from it. All the available surface is capturing the light. And this career-long focus of his, whose life work, he says, is this: quick light passing. Okay, we're in the 2000s. Next. Looking pretty good there, Alex. Okay, next. We lead off, I got to get moving here. We lead off with Ada's garden. It's dark. The light is amazing in it, but there's, again, no narrative, even though it seems like there should be. There is Ada in between her guests. The figures and poses simply describe what they do in the moment. She seems isolated. She appears to perhaps be about to talk to the young woman. There's darkness between them. And I wonder, is Katz as neutral or detached as he thinks he is? And is this somehow metaphorical of where Ada is now in her life? Next. These next two pieces, again, are Black Brook and Related Roadway. And again, you see the artist that's trying to inscribe this process of looking with woods, roadway reduced to the barest geometry, light, form, time of year. Next. These are portraits that he's continuing to do. It's now 2009 of Ada on the left, looking a little more severe with graying, and David Sally, who's a terrific artist and very close friend of Alex. And once again, doing these portraits where the subject is pops in the foreground with a very neutral sort of negative space in the background. Next, these are continuing flower series. They're, the dogwood is huge. It's 140 inches wide. They appear in both cases to be floating. They're beautiful. They're particular, and they're also in this general landscape. Next. This is called Departure, paren Ada. And I don't know if it's signaling Ada's departure. She's still around. She's 94. There were 6 of them. We couldn't fit it somehow. Couldn't find an image of all 6. We made it 4, but I see this as part of perhaps a long goodbye that is still, you know, unfolding. Next. This is a fantastic piece called Untitled Cityscape #4. And this painting was highlighted at a gallery, Serpentine Galleries in London. And I thought they did a lovely job for 2.5 minutes of their impression of the painting and why they thought it was so extraordinary. So we're going to play this. I hope. Jerry, if you can't find it, maybe we should go on. A shame, but I don't want to hang people up.
I had to unmute. Sorry about that.
So Jerry, we can't get it?
Yeah, we'll get it now,
Oh, okay.
I think.
Okay.
Here we are.
There it is.
Sorry.
No problem. You're the greatest. Are you kidding?
Oh, please. This is
And you're inexpensive.
Welcome to the Art Channel, and in this film we're visiting the Alex Katz exhibition at the Serpentine Gallery in Kensington Gardens.
The exhibition, entitled Quick Light, is a combination of portraits and urban landscapes the painter has made over a number of decades. This painting is called Untitled Cityscape 4, and it's part of a series of kind of urban landscapes. This one, I think, done in New York. It's quite an extraordinary, quirky painting, I think, for Katz. It's a very odd angle. I feel as if I'm on a train passing at speed. This building in silhouette, very economical, the television aerial, and really all of his passion in the painting is about that sky, that dramatic, wonderful, fluid sky.
But it's not a sublime romantic painting of the early 19th century like those cloud studies by John Constable. It's very painterly. You get this arc and sweep of sort of white paint, wet on wet with the grey, draws your eye to the sort of beam of light across the canvas. And then below, you get this very contrasting hard edge to the top of this building. It's very anonymous, except for the beam of sort of yellow light showing occupation of the room below.
I think this painting really shows Katz as a really good technician. When you look at the way he's laid on the paint for that sky, it's wonderful. It seems so easy, and actually it says a lot. And I like this idea of being in the moment, present tense. It's just something you see for a moment, very ordinary, very mundane, but he asks you just to stop and look.
Well, it's a very sort of striking, bold image, but it also asks us to consider the experience of being in the city, of how we move through urban space, what it is our eye is drawn to. And here he's returning us to nature, as it were, away from the built environment. But there's a beautiful echo of the yellow in the window in the cloud itself. It's sort of tying the painting together.
Okay. Thanks, Jerry. So this is next, called Quick Light. It's magnificent. I think I wished I could have had this in my college room in my Bagel days. I may never have recovered from it, but this is again part of his Black Brook all-encompassing environmental series called Quick Light, and it's stunning and it's enormous, 144 by 240, and you can imagine how impactful this is. But this again is based on Katz's capturing in the moment this light in this particular location. Next. This, as I said, is another example of Katz's fragmentation. This is his friend Arthur, who has these five fragmented sets of portraits. Again, Katz, I believe, is sort of relating to different ways to see a face by using these fragments as opposed to one single-on figure, and he's relating it back to Philippe de Champagne's triple portrait of Cardinal Richelieu. And again, that painting was what sculptors used when they were creating an image and they didn't have the sitter. Next. Here's another example of that same fragmentation. This is of Bill T. Jones, William Task Jones, a great choreographer and dancer and close friend of Alex Katz. And this is a mural billboard. It's 23 by 47 feet with these fragmented images of Bill Jones. And I love the way the space, the orange, the yellow space moves around these figures, sort of envelops them and really enables the figures themselves to sort of leap out. Next. This is just a fabulous piece called Yellow Trees 1. It is the cover photo of the catalog for the Guggenheim The show was Gatherings and the book is Gatherings, and I have the book. If anybody wants to borrow it and save the $65, just got to give it back. Somebody told someone, I think it was the director, Catherine Brinson, who looked at this and felt that it represented Alex Katz's lifelong project to compress everything into a single burst of energy. And that is certainly the feeling you get, even if it is somewhat of a departure, I think, from all of his flower paintings that were more technical, even in their abstraction. This is more impressionistic. The foliage explodes, covering the entire frame. Next. This is Ada evening, and perhaps the evening of her life, the twilight. And this is Ada from the back, and her gray hair, sort of Brancusi-like. You know, she's aged, but she's beautiful. And she's beautiful in the same immediate present that Katz celebrates, where he says it is in that here, now, immediate present that eternity resides. This is being of one's time, at whatever age. Next. This is again fragmentation and cropped images. Ada is the installation. Everybody knows her. You could reduce the image to the smallest feature of her face, and you would know it's Ada. Ever-present muse. Next. These two pictures I just think are wonderful. Here's Katz with a portrait he's just done. This was in 1918 of Ada. Katz with his skinny legs. Who knew? And next to him is Ada and Katz, a lovely portrait, 2021. Next. And here I love to conclude with this. This is Katz within the last 2 years. On the left, he's just finished that double portrait, and he's looking at it, as I imagine he does for all of his paintings. And next to it, he is painting Dancers 5 and 21. And you can see, and I thought this was great,
Goodbye.
how he paints in his strokes, following, again, the cartoon that I had mentioned. That's part of his technique for doing these outsized pieces. So that concludes. I'm sorry it took a little long. We have one more video if you have time. I think it's 4 minutes, but I thought it would be interesting to hear Alex Katz in his own voice talking about his career.
Well, New York City is impossible. It's a very uncivilized city.
What was it like in terms of being in New York in the early 1950s?
You went to school, and the school was Cooper Union, and it was one of the three or four Bauhaus schools, and they had a real edge. Cooper Union was the capital of provincial modern art. So I studied provincial modern art, really, Cubism and Bauhaus, and at the same time Jackson Pollock hit, and New York changed completely. When I started to paint, full time, at the end of 6 or 7 years, I could really handle painting real well, But I had to work at it. To me, the surface is where the whole thing is, And the things that I have accomplished, I put a new surface. The actual surface of paint is different, and I think that's maybe one of the might be the major thing in my work. I think style is the content of painting, really. That's what I said. And I think style belongs to fashion. And fashion is in the immediate present. And that's really what I was after, the immediate present.
And this is a painting that I know you've just finished and that we're hoping to bring to the show in Tate St. Ives.
Paintings are like wine. Sometimes it travels and sometimes it doesn't. But in general, I think my paintings travel to England quite well.
Now, these I think are 1951, 1952, and they are paintings from photographs. I had no idea whether the paintings would be any good, but I knew they weren't conventional. That was the big thing. I just felt connected to what I was doing by the way it felt. Realistic paintings never got what I was doing, and the abstract people didn't get it either. So I was someplace in between. I was moving away from content. The grammar in my paintings is abstract, but basically the idea is to make something that seems like it's realistic. This is realistic. It's not flat. You can see right into it. The lights are on top of this transparent water. When I decided to do compositions, I realized that they're like compositions that are pre-planned, and paintings like Picasso or constructions, where the guy paints and scrapes and paints and scrapes. And Barney Newman and Monet are like arrangements. You know, they have an arrangement, they keep painting the same arrangement. But a composition has more moving parts. And I had to go into Watteau and Rembrandt to see how to use references. And then the rest of it's all contemporary, you know, just what was in front of me. Martin came in, I think, 3 or 4 days after I painted it. It's different than anything I've done. And at that time, people liked it. I was showing it to people because I couldn't figure out whether it made any sense to anybody. And people went nuts over it. So I thought it would be great to have a new painting. Most painters, when they get older, they get worse. And the real good ones get better. And this is like my stab of saying I got better. You know?
Yeah, he got better and he's still getting better. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed that. He's, you know, quite a remarkable artist.
It was an amazing report. What you brought to us was just outstanding, breathtaking, really.
Thanks.
I didn't know this much about him. You really enlightened us, and I mean, it was just wonderful. When is your next presentation? Really,
No, I'm going to a meditation counselor first. And I have to say that my buddy Sharon, wherever she is, I think upstairs, she put together this presentation, and
wonderful.
You can imagine how much work went into it. She's in meditation now, but she'll come back after a few days.
All the curators in the Philadelphia Museum should be aware of these presentations. They're amazing.
Thank you. I have one in mind, but that's not for right now. Yeah. Hey, Ma. There you are. You're holding your head. What, was it okay or what? She's muted. I was worried that she would unmute during the presentation, which happened once. Hey, Ma, I think you're muted, but I'm glad you were there. Anybody have any questions? Now that I've tied you up for over an hour and a half.
As usual, we are grateful for what you bring to us. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Abraham. My great pleasure. And it's more than a pleasure. As difficult as it is sometimes putting it together, there's no better way to learn about something you're interested in, to immerse yourself in it, knowing you're going to have to present. You don't want to make a jerk out of yourself doing it. You got to really try to understand it. And that all said, I must say, I still don't understand some of what Alex Katz says about the way he is capturing light in the surface, and it's coming back out in the form of energy that engages us. I believe him, but I don't understand it. But seeing his work in person, hey, Guy and Ronnie from Paris.
Hi.
From Paris. Seeing it in person, it is a knockout. And I would say this, he also was an outsider. He was criticized. He talks about some gallery shows he had where people were screaming that this is horrible, this is not art, amateur, go home. And it just fueled his fire. And boy, he had, and he still has it, still has fire.
How old is he now?
96.
Amazing.
Still
Did you ever,
96. He's 96.
96. Did you ever have the chance to meet him?
No, he's in Maine in the summers, and I'd like to, but I had a friend who is in the gallery that showed us the paintings on Miriam Shapiro. That was a couple of months ago. And she went and visited with him and interviewed him. It's a hilarious interview. And at one point, and this is 5 years ago, she said, well, how do you keep so fit? He says he does 200 push-ups a day and runs sprints and high intensity. Yes, and I believe it, because how else can you do what he does that is so demanding mentally and physically? I'd love to meet him. He looks like he's still got some mileage. I hope. I hope we all do.
I'll send you some.
Okay, well,
As always, David, thank you so much.
thank you. Okay, good. And Jerry, thank you, Jerry, for your assistance as always. You and Sharon. I'm just a mouthpiece.
Right. Thank
Okay, all right. Well, have a great day, everybody.
Hi, everyone.
you.
Thank you.
Enjoyed it.
Thank you.